In 2020, Taiwan's semiconductor giant, TSMC, announced plans for a single $12 billion chip factory in the Arizona desert, a headline-grabbing investment at the time. Fast forward a few years, and that plan has swollen into a $100 billion commitment for multiple state-of-the-art facilities. What began as one fab has transformed into something much larger, an entire silicon fortress on American soil. TSMC's Arizona project will now span up to 6 fabs, plus advanced chip packaging sites and a research center, a cluster so massive that it's being billed as the largest greenfield foreign investment in U.S. history. For scale, $100 billion is more than the GDP of some countries, all pouring into one high-tech hub in Phoenix. This astonishing escalation raises a big question. How did we get here? How did TSMC's modest US venture turn into perhaps the biggest tech geopolitical entanglement of the 2020s? And what does this colossal bet mean for the future of technology and global security? To answer that, we need to understand why these little silicon chips have become such a huge deal, and why world leaders are treating a chip factory like a strategic asset. TSMC is no ordinary company. It has emerged as the world's most important chip manufacturer, commanding about 65% of the global foundry market, where companies fabricate chips for others. More critically, TSMC produces almost all of the world's cutting-edge semiconductors, those tiny, powerful chips under 10 nanometers that go into flagship smartphones, advanced AI systems, and military hardware. In fact, by some estimates, Taiwan, mainly TSMC, manufactures 90% of the world's most advanced processors. Virtually every modern device or data center you can think of relies on TSMC's chips. We're talking iPhones, high-end GPUs, car computers, even components for fighter jets and spacecraft, all fueled by silicon wafers etched in TSMC's facilities. In the words of one analysis, nearly every device, from toasters and iPhones to automobiles and fighter jets, plus the data centers powering AI models, depend on TSMC manufactured chips. It's not just consumer gadgets. TSMC is a linchpin for both superpowers in the global tech race. US firms like Apple, Nvidia, AMD, and Qualcomm design the brains of our devices, but they rely on TSMC to bring those designs to life. In fact, TSMC fabricates around 92% of the most advanced chips that American companies design. At the same time, China, which has poured billions into its own chip industry, still depends on TSMC for an estimated 70% of the semiconductors it needs for its electronics industry. In short, TSMC is the invisible force behind the global electronics supply chain, making it a single point of failure in a tech-dependent world. Taiwanese leaders often refer to TSMC as part of Taiwan's Silicon Shield. The idea is that Taiwan's dominance in chip manufacturing protects it from attack, because no one, neither East nor West, can afford to see these chip fabs go dark. It's a bit like a high-tech insurance policy. Disrupting TSMC would stall industries worldwide, so Taiwan's chip prowess deters aggression by making any conflict economically catastrophic. As one observer noted, Taiwan without its semiconductor industry would be like Ukraine without nuclear weapons, far more vulnerable. Semiconductors today are as strategically important as oil was in the last century. By that measure, TSMC is the Saudi Arabia of advanced chips, and its home base of Taiwan has a unique strategic importance far out of proportion to its size. This is the backdrop against which the US moved to lure some of that chip-making might to its own shores. TSMC's journey in Arizona began as part of a broader push to secure chip supply chains. Around 2019, officials in Washington started courting TSMC to build a fab in the US, amid growing alarm that America was over-reliant on Taiwanese chips sitting a mere 100 miles from China's coast. In May 2020, TSMC finally announced it would invest $12 billion to build an advanced 5-nanometer fab in Phoenix, a huge win for US industrial policy at the time. The plan was to have that first fab produce 20,000 wafers per month by 2024. US leaders hailed the move as a step toward restoring American chip manufacturing. Then the ambitions grew. By 2021, the geopolitical stakes around semiconductors had only intensified, worsened by a pandemic chip shortage and escalating US-China tech tensions. Washington passed the CHIPS and Science Act in 2022, dangling $52.7 billion in subsidies to spur domestic semiconductor production. With generous federal and state incentives on the table, and perhaps prodding from big customers like Apple, TSMC expanded its plans. In late 2022, at a high-profile tool-in ceremony attended by US President Joe Biden and Apple's CEO Tim Cook, TSMC announced a second fab in Arizona even before the first one was finished. The investment doubled to $40 billion, and TSMC upgraded the plan. The first fab would produce 4-nanometer chips, one generation better than originally planned, and the second fab would aim for 3-nanometer process technology by 2026 to 2027. At that event, TSMC even showcased made-in-Arizona Apple silicon wafers, underscoring the strategic importance, an American soil production line for chips destined for iPhones and more. By 2023, construction was in full swing, but not without challenges. More on those soon. Still, the trajectory was set. In late 2024, TSMC's Fab 21 Phase 1, the first Arizona fab, finally entered volume production, producing 4-nanometer chips for US clients, the first time such advanced chips were ever made in the States. With one fab operational and a second under construction, talk turned to making Phoenix a full gigafab campus, like TSMC's huge sites in Taiwan. In April 2024, TSMC signaled it might build a third fab by 2030 and was upping its total US investment to $65 billion. Clearly, the project was evolving from a single factory into a broader campus. Then came the bombshell. March 2025, a meeting at the White House. TSMC's CEO C.C. Wei stood beside the US president to announce an additional $100 billion expansion in Arizona. The plan: 3 more fabs, bringing the total to 6, 2 advanced packaging facilities, and a major R&D center. In other words, TSMC committed to build an entire end-to-end semiconductor ecosystem in the US, from wafer fabrication to chip packaging and research. This would boost TSMC's total investment in Arizona to a staggering $165 billion. What was once a lone fab has become a full chip-making cluster, a silicon fortress aimed at supporting everything from smartphones to AI servers on American soil. Officials described it in grand terms. Arizona's governor called the state the epicenter of advanced chip manufacturing and innovation in America, and lauded the thousands of high-tech jobs on the way. US policymakers, fresh off bipartisan efforts to bolster domestic chips, cheered that this would reduce reliance on foreign supply chains and make sure America leads the industries of the future. Indeed, the vision is for the Phoenix site to eventually churn out leading-edge chips, targeting 2-nanometer and beyond by the late 2020s, and to host critical advanced packaging capabilities so that AI and high-performance computing chips can be fully built in the USA. It's worth noting that the US government sweetened the deal considerably. TSMC has been approved for at least $6.6 billion in federal grants under the CHIPS Act, plus likely billions in tax credits, a 25% investment tax, credit on fabs, and state-level incentives. This public support was crucial, as TSMC's leadership openly stated, needed government support helped make the Arizona fab viable. Another unstated ingredient was pressure. The US administration also hinted at tariffs on imported chips if companies didn't produce more in America. In fact, at the 2025 announcement, President Trump bluntly warned that chips made abroad could face tariffs of 25%, 30%, even 50%, saying of TSMC, "By doing it here, he has no tariffs." It was the carrot and stick approach, subsidies and tax breaks on one side, tariff threats on the other, to pull advanced semiconductor manufacturing stateside. So by 2025, what started as a single fab had escalated into an entire TSMC Arizona campus in the making. The site sprawls over 1,100 acres, about 625 football fields, in North Phoenix. The first fab is up and running. The second fab's shell is complete, though its 3nm 2nm production is delayed to 2028. A third fab, geared for 2nm and beyond, has broken ground in 2025. Eventually, the complex could host 6 fabs, rivaling TSMC's giant Fab 12 campus back in Hsinchu, Taiwan. In effect, TSMC is cloning a mini version of its Taiwan operation on US soil. It's an audacious effort to localize the supply chain, not just the fabs, but also bringing over suppliers, contractors, and expertise. As TSMC itself puts it, this will create a semiconductor supply chain cluster in Arizona, clustering manufacturers, suppliers, and researchers to fuel long-term innovation. In other words, the Arizona project isn't just a factory, it's an entire ecosystem in the making, aimed at anchoring the most advanced chip capabilities in the United States. This massive US investment by TSMC isn't just economic, it's reshaping the strategic relationship between the United States and Taiwan. Some are calling it a new silicon-steel bond, silicon for the chips, steel for the strength of the alliance being forged. By interweaving their tech industries, the US and Taiwan are binding themselves closer than ever before in a mutual dependency that could alter geopolitical calculations. Consider the implications. Taiwan's silicon shield is no longer confined to Taiwan. A piece of it is now being built in America. This creates a sort of double-layered shield. On one hand, Taiwan's dominance in chips still acts as a deterrent against Chinese aggression. Nobody wants to wreck the world's chip supply. On the other hand, by partnering with the US to expand production, Taiwan is effectively lending some of that strategic asset to its most powerful ally. The result is a tighter coupling of US and Taiwanese interests. One former Taiwanese president, Tsai Ing-wen, explicitly likened the island's semiconductor industry to a shield. Not only would China hesitate to destroy it, but the US would be more inclined to defend Taiwan to protect the technology from falling into Beijing's hands. Now, with TSMC investing in Arizona, that logic extends further. The US has skin in the game like never before. In Washington, policymakers see this as a win-win, with some caveats. America gets more control over supply of critical chips and a boost to high-tech manufacturing. Taiwan, in turn, cements its security partnership with the US by making itself even more indispensable. As 2 analysts noted, TSMC's huge investment should at the very least stabilize US-Taiwan relations and could very well provide momentum for even closer ties. It's hard to put a price on trust, but $100+ billion in shared economic interests certainly doesn't hurt. This partnership could influence even high-level attitudes. Notably, US President Trump, who in the past voiced skepticism about defending Taiwan and mused that Taiwan should pay for US protection, has become one of the biggest cheerleaders of TSMC's US expansion. Standing next to the TSMC CEO, he declared, "The most powerful AI chips in the world will be made right here in America," and praised the deal as a matter of US national security. The subtext was clear. Taiwan, through TSMC, is helping the US rebuild its tech arsenal, potentially making a president, Trump or anyone else, value Taiwan more as a critical ally. By demonstrating how much Taiwan's tech can contribute to American industry and AI leadership, the island strengthens its hand in the alliance. Of course, US officials are quick to clarify that the alliance with Taiwan isn't only about chips. The US has security commitments under the Taiwan Relations Act and a long-standing interest in Taiwan's democracy and stability that predate the semiconductor era. But there's no denying that the chip partnership adds a powerful economic security linkage. As one US commerce official put it, America convinced the world's top chip makers, TSMC, Samsung, Intel, and others, to build in the States precisely to tackle national security risks from over-reliance on overseas chips. And Taiwan, by being part of that solution, further ingrains itself in the US camp. From China's point of view, TSMC's US expansion is a double-edged development. Beijing has long chafed at the so-called Silicon Shield protecting Taiwan. China's leaders know that Taiwan's chip dominance is a major reason the world, even China itself, hesitates to see Taiwan thrown into chaos. Now, with TSMC planting high-end capacity in America, Beijing can see a troubling scenario. The US and Taiwan drawing even closer, and America becoming somewhat less vulnerable to a chip cutoff. In other words, China's leverage over the global chip supply could diminish, while US resolve to defend Taiwan could increase. First, consider the leverage aspect. Some analysts have speculated that one Chinese incentive to control Taiwan is to gain TSMC's capabilities, to instantly make China a semiconductor superpower. But if a chunk of TSMC's most advanced production is happening in Arizona, and potentially other overseas sites like Japan or Germany in the future, then China can't simply inherit all of TSMC by seizing Taiwan. Also, TSMC has made clear it will keep its very cutting-edge R&D in Taiwan, and the Taiwan government has vowed to keep its most advanced manufacturing processes in Taiwan, despite the US expansion. In fact, Taiwan's officials said 2 nanometers and 1.6 nanometers chips will not be produced in the US in the near future. So Beijing would not only face the enormous military and economic costs of an invasion, but it might still not get its hands on the latest tech, and would risk destroying what exists. The prospect of TSMC facilities being damaged or experts fleeing in a conflict makes the prize of a functioning chip industry in Taiwan even more elusive. As an executive quipped, invading Taiwan for TSMC would be like burning down a library to steal a book, probably self-defeating. Then there's the deterrence aspect. By 2025, the US is not just a distant guarantor of Taiwan, it's literally a host to some of Taiwan's most valuable industrial assets. An attack on Taiwan now threatens a key partner of American industry. In March 2025, President Trump explicitly said an invasion of Taiwan would be catastrophic, but that thanks to the TSMC investment, the US would have a very big part of chip making on its own soil, reducing the damage to US interests. Chinese strategists surely took note. The US is hedging against the worst-case scenario. However, from another angle, one could ask, if the US can make advanced chips at home, would it feel less pressure to intervene militarily in Taiwan? This is precisely the fear some in Taiwan have, as we'll discuss in a moment, that by making the US less chip-dependent on Taiwan, the Silicon Shield might weaken. Beijing might calculate that if the US had secured its own supply of advanced chips, it might be more complacent about Taiwan's fate. It's a complex equation. On balance, though, most experts think TSMC's US expansion raises the costs for Beijing if it were to consider military action. China would now face an even more unified front of Taiwan and the US together, both technologically and economically. The Chinese Communist Party has invested heavily in trying to achieve self-sufficiency in semiconductors, pouring billions into domestic chip firms precisely because it fears being cut off. US export controls in recent years have struck at China's access to advanced chips and tools, hampering Beijing's progress. With TSMC's Arizona fabs, China might see yet another move to sideline China from the chip supply chain, effectively encircling them in the tech domain. There is also the scenario of war to consider bluntly. If conflict did erupt over Taiwan, the global semiconductor supply would be devastated. Even with an Arizona campus, TSMC's core operations in Taiwan, which would still be producing the majority of its chips in the near term, could be disrupted or destroyed. This prospect is one reason observers call the status quo a fragile peace. One study noted that a Taiwan cross-strait war that halted chip exports could cost the global economy trillions and take years to recover. The stakes are astronomically high for all parties, which is precisely why maintaining deterrence is critical. With TSMC now deeply entangled with US industry, the hope is that China will see a conflict as even more unwinnable. It wouldn't just face Taiwanese resistance and international sanctions, but it would also permanently lose access to the world's best chips, since TSMC outside China would survive and cut China off, and trigger direct confrontation with a US that has even more to lose if Taiwan falls. From Beijing's perspective, this situation is frustrating. China can saber-rattle, as it did with military drills near Taiwan after political visits in 2022, but the economic reality constrains action. Ironically, by helping insulate the US from a total chip cutoff, TSMC's US investment might embolden Washington to be even tougher on China's tech ambitions. We've already seen the US rally allies to block China's access to extreme EUV lithography machines and top-end AI chips. If the US feels more secure in its own chip supply, it could double down on these tech containment policies. In short, TSMC's American fortress complicates Beijing's calculus. Any move on Taiwan now looks even more like a lose-lose proposition. The price of aggression, economically and strategically, keeps going up. Amid all the grand geopolitical talk, it's important to note that building chips in the US is hard and expensive. TSMC's Arizona adventure has encountered plenty of challenges that raise questions about long-term competitiveness. Making leading-edge semiconductors is arguably the most complex manufacturing process on Earth, and doing it outside of TSMC's home turf has exposed difficulties in cost, speed, and culture. Cost overruns and delays have been a recurring theme. The first Phoenix fab was initially slated to start production by 2024, but it barely met that timeline after significant delays. Construction took longer than expected, and by mid-2023, TSMC even announced a pushback of the second fab's start date to 2025 and later to 2026/27 due to labor shortages. When the first Arizona fab finally began pilot production, TSMC revealed that the cost per chip will be substantially higher than in Taiwan. How much higher? Estimates varied. TSMC had internally pegged Arizona's cost at about 50% above its Taiwan fabs, but founder Morris Chang bluntly said the real cost looks closer to double what it is back home. That is an astonishing gap. Even a 50% cost penalty is huge in the semiconductor industry, which operates on razor-thin margins for commodity chips. Chang warned that such high costs could slow down the adoption of chips in end products or make the fabs economically unviable. Little wonder that when TSMC announced its $100 billion US expansion in 2025, its stock price actually dipped. Investors were nervous that pouring so much capital into high-cost US fabs might hurt the company's profitability. Workforce and skills have been another pain point. Semiconductor manufacturing is highly specialized, and TSMC's cutting-edge process know-how resides largely with its engineers in Taiwan. To get the Arizona fab up and running, TSMC ended up flying over hundreds of experienced technicians from Taiwan. By early 2023, roughly 500 Taiwanese workers were in Phoenix to install equipment and train locals. As of 2024, about half of the 2,200 employees at TSMC Arizona were engineers dispatched from Taiwan. This highlights a domestic talent shortage in the US for semiconductor manufacturing. TSMC has been scrambling to hire and train Americans, but it's a slow process to build a skilled workforce from scratch. In the meantime, they've had to rely on a rotational army of Taiwanese staff. This arrangement has caused some culture clash on the fab floor. American engineers bristled at TSMC's rigid high-pressure management style, while TSMC managers complained that US workers lacked the dedication and obedience that TSMC's 24/7 operations demand. One industry expert noted that TSMC tried to make Arizona Taiwanese, and it's just not going to work, meaning a copy-paste of TSMC's Taiwan work culture into an American context was met with friction. This human factor is a big challenge. Can an American work culture adapt enough, and can TSMC adapt its style to reach the extreme efficiency that its Taiwan fabs have? It matters, because any productivity issues will further drive up costs. Regulatory and logistical issues have also added headaches. TSMC's CEO C.C. Wei admitted that building the fab in the US has taken twice as long as it would for a similar facility in Taiwan. US environmental and safety regulations, while important, required navigating new bureaucratic hoops. By one report, TSMC spent $35 million just to establish compliance and regulatory procedures for the Arizona fab, money it wouldn't have to spend in Taiwan. Additionally, some specialized materials and chemicals needed for chip making still have to be shipped from Taiwan or elsewhere, because the local supply chain in Arizona is not yet fully in place. For example, things like high-purity gases or photoresists might need to cross the ocean, adding time and cost. TSMC is encouraging its suppliers to set up locally. Some have followed, but not all ecosystem pieces are present yet. Until a robust supplier park is established in Phoenix, the Arizona fabs won't have the same just-in-time convenience as the Taiwan fabs, where a mature cluster of suppliers exists right next door. All these factors mean that, at least in the short run, chips made in Arizona will be significantly pricier. The US government is offsetting some of this with subsidies and tax credits, effectively bridging the cost gap to entice companies like TSMC to produce domestically. But those subsidies won't last forever. The CHIPS Act funding is a one-time boost, and it's unclear if the US fabs can achieve cost parity with Asia in the long term. Morris Chang has even questioned why the US is trying to recreate what Taiwan already does so efficiently. He noted that America's share of global chip making, around 10 to 12%, is already more than enough to meet US military needs, which he estimated at only a couple percent of global output, implying that the drive for 40% share is more about economic nationalism than pure security. Chang openly said he supports US efforts to constrain China for security reasons, but can't understand why Washington wants to move so much manufacturing from efficient Asian sites to higher-cost US sites. From TSMC's perspective, the Arizona fabs will only make up a small fraction of its total capacity. Even with expansion, there'll be maybe 10 to 15% of TSMC's output in a decade. The company can afford some inefficiency there if it's subsidized. The strategic benefits, pleasing key customers and governments, might outweigh the hit to margins. But it's a fine line. If costs run amok or timelines slip too much, TSMC risks burning cash and distracting management. For US ambitions, the question is whether they can streamline construction and train enough talent to make these fabs competitive. The early stumbles, delays, cost overruns, worker complaints are cautionary signs. The Arizona project is like a test case for onshoring advanced tech manufacturing. And as of 2024, the verdict was not yet in. Skepticism abounds about whether America can truly replicate TSMC's vaunted production prowess on home turf. In short, the US has secured a strategic chip foothold, but making it economically sustainable will require overcoming steep learning curves. As one report summarized, TSMC's Arizona chips could end up approximately 50% more expensive than those made in Taiwan, even as the most advanced R&D stays in Taiwan. That suggests US fabs might always lag a bit in tech and cost. One analysis noted TSMC seems on pace to have each new process node built in the US, but consistently 2 processes behind Taiwan, keeping the bleeding edge at home. TSMC's founder bluntly said US manufacturing simply cannot match Taiwan's efficiency. He even argued the US only needs a modest amount of local capacity for security, not a whole duplicated industry. These counterpoints illustrate that while the Arizona fabs are strategically important, they come with serious economic trade-offs. The $100 billion handcuffs are golden handcuffs indeed, binding the US and Taiwan, but costing a fortune to wear.